It's not external circumstances, not fate, not other people. It is your mind where everything truly begins. Every choice you make, every emotion you feel, every result you are living with, all are direct consequences of the way you think. Thinking is not just a vague stream of thoughts floating in your head. It is a silent yet powerful blueprint that draws out every detail of the life you walk through each day. The truth is, you do not react to reality. You react to how your mind interprets that reality. And right there, you already hold more power than you realize. People often try to change their lives by seeking tools outside themselves. A new job, a new relationship, a new environment. But if the old mind is still running in the background, you will carry the same old habits, beliefs, and fears into the very place you thought was a fresh start. Real change does not happen when you move houses, switch companies, or replace a partner. It only happens when you change the person who talks in your head every day. That is the starting point of every action, every decision, and every belief you've lived with as if it were absolute. Thinking is the first force that shapes reality. What you think doesn't stop at awareness, it transforms into emotion. Emotions direct your physiological responses, energy state, behavior, and outcomes. A negative thought doesn't just make you sad for a few minutes. It can disrupt your nervous system, release cortisol, reduce your ability to focus, damage relationships, affect your health, and even determine the direction of a day, a year, or a lifetime. Every thought is a biological command. And that's no longer a theory, it's a fact, supported by neuroscience and modern psychology. The question is no longer, am I thinking positively, but rather, am I thinking in the right direction? Because you could think positively all day and still be stuck in a faulty pattern. Effective thinking isn't about painting life in rosy colors. It's about facing the way your mind operates, dissecting the layers of programming installed by family, society, memories, and pain. Most of what you think isn't your own. It's inherited, copied, or reactive echoes from the past. You think it's you, but in truth, it's a version that's been programmed. And because of that, true awakening doesn't come from a big life event. It arrives the moment you pause and ask, who is doing the thinking in my head? When you dare to ask that, the door to freedom begins to crack open. No more autopilot living, no more unconscious reactions. You begin to consciously redesign your thought content instead of being led by the echoes of things you've never questioned. And a conscious mind is not a perfect mind. It is a mind that knows it is thinking and chooses its thoughts with awareness. When you change the way you think, the world doesn't transform instantly, but everything around you starts responding differently. Opportunities you once overlooked become clearer. Relationships that felt stuck begin to open up. Limitations you believed were fixed start to dissolve. Not because the world suddenly favors you more, but because you've changed your perspective. And through that new lens, you start acting differently. And it is new actions that create new results. Not some magical law of attraction, but the resonance between consciousness, emotion, behavior, and reality. Your mind is not a storage unit of data. It is a machine that continuously generates reality. Each thought is a blueprint. Each emotion is a chemical directive. Each reaction is a habit imprinted in your nervous system. And if you don't steer this current, no matter how many skills you learn or how many plans you have, you'll end up back at the same point with the same outcomes. Because reality isn't determined from the outside. It is born from within you. Many people ask, what should I do to change my life? The answer doesn't lie in what you do, but in what you are thinking. Because every action is the result of a thought behind it. If you act from lack, you multiply lack. If you act from fear, you create a reality full of control and limitations. But if you act from trust, from clarity, from a mature perspective, you don't just change the outcome, you are changing the person you are becoming. And that is the true essence of transformation. Every day you have tens of thousands of thoughts. Most of them are repetitive. If you don't filter them, your mind will operate on autopilot. And that autopilot is often a product of the past. But you are not the past. You are not the old story. You are the one rewriting each line of that script through the way you think in the present. And you can start at any moment. It only takes one new thought, and if repeated long enough, it will become a new neural pathway, a new trajectory for the future. Your mind does not need to be fixed. It needs to be guided. Not because it's broken, but because it is blindly loyal to what was once programmed. But the moment you reclaim the command, everything outdated begins to be challenged. Old reaction patterns become more visible. You begin to distinguish between your true voice and the echoes of the past. And you start choosing differently. That's when you start being a victim of the mind and become its leader. No one can change your life until you change the way you think. No tool is more powerful than a mind that is governed with awareness, and no one can do that for you, except you. Everything begins there. Not tomorrow, not when things are more perfect, not when you feel ready, but right now, when you begin to change the way you talk to yourself. That is not motivation, that is awakening. Not every thought that appears in your mind is true, and the voice that echoes in your head each day is not your true self. It's time to separate the two, because if you don't, you'll spend your whole life as a victim of the thing called I think. But thoughts are products. You are the one creating those products, or being operated by them without even knowing it. The difference between living awake and living in a fog begins at this very boundary. You no longer confuse the stream of thoughts with your true essence. The mind is a machine that generates thoughts. It's a biological function. It runs nonstop, drawing from old memories, past experiences, things others have said, images you've seen, unresolved fears. Every thought that pops into your head is the result of a network of neural connections, etched repeatedly over many years, sometimes from childhood, from moments you were too young to understand, but sensitive enough to remember. And because they come from within you, you assume they are you. But that is one of the greatest illusions we carry through life. You are not the whisper that tells you I'm not good enough. You are not the repeated phrase, I'll never be truly loved. You are not the anxiety that arises when you start something new. You are the one hearing those sentences, and that makes all the difference. Thoughts are content. You are awareness, the one observing that content. When you realize this, you are no longer a puppet in the play of memories and unconscious programming. You begin to reclaim command. Many people live their entire lives pulled by invisible voices in their heads, never stopping to ask, did I actually choose this thought? They let old stories dictate present reactions. Someone who has been rejected in the past will carry the fear of abandonment into every relationship. Someone who was once belittled will react strongly to any feedback, as if it threatens their identity, not because they're weak, but because they've never been taught how to distinguish between thoughts and truth. The problem isn't what you think, it's how much you believe what you think. And it is that belief that creates the reality you live in. When you forget that you can choose your thoughts, you fall into automatic reactions. Everything feels personal. Every word becomes an attack. Every failure is seen as proof of worthlessness. But when you take a step back and observe your thoughts, like text scrolling across a screen, you open up an inner space. A space where you don't have to react immediately, but can choose how to respond with intention. No one ever taught you that there's a space between stimulus and response, and within that space lies your freedom. The freedom to see a thought without being ruled by it. The freedom to replace a negative inner phrase with one that is healthier. The freedom to create a new perspective, one that is deeper, more honest, and more supportive for your journey. And that is when you stop living as a copy of your past and start becoming a self that is being recreated from the inside out. Make no mistake, detaching from your thoughts does not mean denying your emotions or ignoring what's happening. On the contrary, it's the act of someone taking full responsibility. When you no longer identify with every thought, you begin to clearly see the unconscious beliefs that have been driving you, and from there you truly gain the opportunity to heal, to choose, and to change. No longer reacting, now designing. No longer saying, this is just how I am, but instead, I can become a higher version of myself. One of the most powerful actions you can take in a day is to pause. Close your eyes and observe what your mind is saying. No judgment, no interference. Simply observe as if you were listening to someone else telling a story. And you'll be surprised by how many thoughts you didn't choose. Some thoughts repeat like a broken tape. Some ideas come from others, but have taken root in your mind as if they were truth. But once you see them, they no longer control you. You are handed back the key. Every person has the ability to observe their inner world. You don't need a degree. You don't need complex skills. You only need presence. You only need the courage to pause in the middle of a thought storm and ask yourself, is what I'm thinking actually true? Is it helpful? Does it come from my real values? And if the answer is no, then you have the right to change it. Begin with a different question, a new affirmation, a new belief. The more you practice this, the more you'll become separate from unconscious repetition. Old reactions will lose their grip. Old neural pathways will stop being reinforced. And you'll begin building a new mental map, one where awareness is the center, where you no longer live as a victim of thought, but as the guide that steers it in the direction you choose. Awakening is not some mystical spiritual event. It is a simple yet courageous act to refuse to identify with every thought that passes through the mind, and from that moment you begin to live as your true self, the observer, the creator, the free one. You are not the critical voices in your head, not the recurring anxieties, not the echoes of the past. You are the one who hears all of that and can choose what to keep and what to release. You are not your thoughts. You are the one who thinks, and that defines your true inner power. Every thought you hold in your mind is not merely a floating concept, but a biological command sent directly to your body. You think you're reasoning, but in truth you're programming. A single line of thought can trigger feelings of unease, cause your heart to race, your muscles to tense, and your immune system to suppress. Conversely, a hopeful, positive thought can relax the body, deepen the breath, and shift the nervous system into a state of restoration. Every thought, no matter how small, carries a physical consequence. The mind doesn't just generate emotions, it gradually reshapes your biology over time. What's more striking is that this process occurs continuously, whether you're aware of it or not. Every time you respond negatively to an email, a glance, a memory, you're not just feeling it, you're transmitting a chemical message throughout your body, creating a repeatable physiological cascade. Adrenaline spikes, cortisol is released, digestion halts, and your defense mechanisms are activated. And if you remain in that state long enough, your brain starts memorizing it as the default, not because you want to be anxious, but because you've trained your body to become familiar with anxiety. People often think emotions are natural, spontaneous, but emotions don't just appear. They are activated by how you interpret the world. You don't feel hurt because someone is silent. You feel hurt because you think they're ignoring me. You don't feel angry because you were rejected. You feel angry because you think I'm not valuable. The same event can elicit completely different emotional responses in two people simply because each person assigns a different meaning to it. And it's that thought, not the situation itself, that becomes the first factor shaping the emotion. Emotion is the biological echo of a thought. It is your internal reaction to what you believe is true. Every time you think, I'm going to fail, your body responds as if you are failing. The body can't distinguish between reality and imagination. It only responds to what you believe is real. So if you live in a prolonged stream of negative thoughts, you won't just feel mentally drained, you are deepening a self-destructive biological pattern. Negative thinking doesn't just lower your quality of life. It corrupts the entire internal operating system of your physiology. And the reverse is also true. A right intentional thought can generate a whole new favorable biological environment. When you think, I can handle this, your body responds by increasing dopamine, the neurotransmitter that boosts motivation and focus. When you think, I am loved, I am safe, oxytocin is released, fostering a sense of connection, trust, and hormonal stability. This is not vague positive thinking. This is measurable neuroscience. You're not just creating feelings. You're actively reprogramming your brain's chemistry. If you understand this, you'll become more mindful of every stream of thought passing through your mind, because every thought is a drop of color poured into the bloodstream you carry. Every thought is a brick laid into the foundation of your emotional state. And if emotions are repeated long enough, they become your default mental climate. You can live in a prolonged winter of anxiety simply because you've never learned how to warm your inner landscape. And you can also enter a space of inner calm, not by escaping reality, but by reconstructing how you think about it. Imagine someone stuck in traffic. One person thinks, everything is always against me. Immediately, heart rate increases, palms sweat, a sense of helplessness spreads. The second person thinks, I can use this time to listen to a podcast. Breathing stays steady. The nervous system remains in balance. Same situation, but two bodies reacting as if they're living in completely different worlds. Not because of the traffic, but because their minds interpreted it differently. And that interpretation shapes the bodily experience. You don't need to force yourself to always think positively. What you need is to deliberately choose thoughts that align with the reality you wish to create. It's not about sugarcoating the problem. It's about owning the perspective and from there, consciously creating biology that supports you rather than sabotages you. If you constantly think of yourself as a victim, your body will live in defense mode. But if you start thinking like a learner, an explorer, someone evolving, your entire nervous system shifts from resistance to openness. And in that state, emotional intelligence, creativity, and trust finally have room to rise. You can either work with your body or unintentionally fight against it through the very thoughts you entertain. And no one controls that stream of thinking but you. Don't let old memories, childhood programming, or emotionally reactive patterns continue to shape your feelings and health each day. Start observing, start choosing, start rebuilding. A new thought could be the foundation of an entirely new biological state. Power doesn't lie in controlling every emotion. Power lies in understanding that emotion is the result, not the cause. And the cause always starts with a thought. Make that thought clear, intentional, conscious, and directed. Choose a thought that nourishes you instead of depleting you, because thought, whether you believe it or not, is the silent yet most powerful architect of the emotions you're living and the body you inhabit. Beliefs don't fall from the sky. They are not truths. They are merely thoughts repeated often enough for the mind to accept them as unquestionable facts. And it is in that repetition that a belief gains power. Silently, persistently, yet also with great imposition. You don't live according to who you dream of becoming. You live according to who you believe you are right now. And what you believe, whether true or false, becomes the map that limits you every single day. No one grows up without carrying beliefs formed in childhood. Casual phrases like, stop messing around, you're not good at that. A girl like you won't be loved. Don't dream too big, life doesn't work that way. When repeated in deep and consistent contexts, etch themselves into the mind as unspoken declarations. I am inadequate. I am unworthy. It's not safe to be myself. And over the years, those original thoughts are no longer recognized as thoughts. They become definitions. They become identity. They become something you no longer dare to question. A limiting belief doesn't need to be loud to control you. It only needs to be quiet and familiar enough that you stop asking about it. You reject opportunities because I'm not capable enough. You stay in toxic relationships because I can't find anyone better. You never show your true self because I don't deserve anyone's attention. These actions don't come from logic, they come from belief. And once a belief rules, all logic becomes a tool to justify that limitation. You're no longer living with reality, you're living with an illusion built from a repeated loop. The mind doesn't seek truth, it seeks consistency. When you believe you're useless, you will unconsciously ignore compliments and cling to the smallest criticisms to reinforce what you already believe. When you believe you're not good enough, you will self-sabotage every time opportunity comes close, not because you want to fail, but because failure helps maintain the familiar image you have of yourself. That's how the mind operates. It would rather stay in familiar pain than face an unpredictable new version of you, and so the old belief, even if false, continues to dominate. What makes belief dangerous is not its size, it's its invisibility. You don't see it as a distinct object to change. It hides beneath layers of, this is just how I am, this is what I've been through, this is certain. You call it instinct, personality, destiny, but deep down it's still a sequence of old thoughts repeated long enough to carve neural pathways like grooves in the brain. And without awareness, you'll continue following that groove, not because you want to, but because you don't know you can step out of it. Every belief is a lens through which you view the world. If you believe you're not good enough, you won't see opportunities, even when they're right in front of you. If you believe life is a battle, you'll treat everyone as a potential enemy. If you believe you're always being rejected, you'll interpret neutral behaviors as rejection and create distance before anyone gets close. Beliefs don't just exist in your head. They radiate through your eyes, your gestures, your choices, your frequency. And the world responds to exactly what you project, forming a self-fulfilling loop. But any loop can be broken if you dare to ask, what do I believe and who taught me to believe this? When you begin to trace your beliefs, you'll see that most of what's running you wasn't your choice. It came from the voices of your parents, the attitudes of your teachers, the reactions of society, and the wounds you once endured. You're not wrong for carrying those beliefs, but you are responsible for deciding whether to keep or release them once you're aware. No one is forcing you to cling to beliefs that once helped you survive. You are no longer the child who had to stay silent to be loved, no longer the student who had to get perfect grades to feel seen, no longer the person who was first rejected and concluded they were unworthy. You've changed. But if your mind hasn't been reprogrammed, it will keep operating from the old version. And that's why rewriting belief is not a spiritual abstraction. It is an act of liberation. You can begin rewriting a belief with a question, not to impose positive thinking on old pain, but to open a new possibility. What if I am worthy even when I do nothing? What would change if I believed I could learn any skill? How would I behave if I truly believed I deserved to be deeply, unconditionally loved? The question doesn't need an answer right away. It just needs to be asked with honesty, with courage, and repeated with patient persistence. When you repeat a new belief, it will feel fake at first. That's normal. Your body isn't used to it. Your nervous system doesn't trust it. The old voice will scream in protest. But if you persist, not with force, but with steadiness, each small action will begin to reinforce the new belief. Every time you speak up, every time you say no to what's unworthy, every time you stop apologizing for your existence, is a step in laying the foundation for a new map. And over time, the new becomes familiar. What's real becomes your reality. Belief is not destiny, but it operates like destiny if you're not conscious. And any destiny can be rewritten when you dare to look at where it began. A thought repeated, a thought chosen again, this time consciously from the person you are becoming, not from the place where you were once hurt. And that is how you transform from someone limited by what they once believed into someone who consciously chooses the belief that best aligns with the freedom they truly deserve. Every habit, emotion, or belief you currently hold is the result of a repeated neurological programming process. The brain doesn't create truth. It records what's reinforced the most. And if you don't consciously reprogram it, it will continue to operate based on old reflexes, old memories, and recycled stories from the past. Don't confuse "this is who I am" with "this is what I've repeated long enough for my brain to treat as default." The difference lies in awareness, and change begins the moment you reclaim your role as the designer. Reprogramming the brain isn't wishful thinking. It's a natural biological ability of the human nervous system, what science calls neuroplasticity, the capacity to restructure neural pathways through conscious repetition. This means you can build a new path for your thoughts, emotions, and behaviors, as long as you're willing to walk it each day. At first, it feels like cutting through a forest, slow, obstructed, but each step sends a signal to the brain that says this is the new direction, and if you don't stop, the path becomes clearer over time. What matters isn't whether you have enough motivation to start, it's whether you have intentional will to repeat wisely. Because motivation is emotion, while change requires steady action. Your brain doesn't care if you're excited or scared. It only records what you do most often. If you think, "I'm useless every morning," your brain logs that. But if you wake up early, breathe deeply, place your hand on your chest, and say, "I am reshaping myself," then act in alignment with that, day after day, your brain will begin to revise its entire activity map. The power of intentional repetition lies in how you integrate thought, emotion, and behavior in a consistent loop. It's not just about thinking positively while your body ignores it, nor is it about robotic action without changing your internal dialogue. Your brain needs emotion to learn faster. A statement like, "I am changing," becomes effective only when said in a state of expanded posture, connected mind, and eyes focused on something meaningful. Every detail helps reinforce a new belief faster, because you're not just saying it, you're experiencing what you say. One of the most common mistakes in change is waiting to feel ready. But your brain doesn't need to feel, it needs to repeat. And true readiness comes after action, not before. The longer you wait for an ideal emotional state, the more you strengthen the neural network of delay. But if you start acting, even while trembling, you're teaching your brain, "I am someone who moves forward even when not perfect." That message, if repeated consistently through action, will gradually erase old scripts and replace them with a more empowered design. No need for dramatic breakthroughs. The most profound changes often begin with small rituals. Rewriting thoughts in a morning journal, choosing softer words in self-talk, spending a few minutes visualizing your best self, daring to stand tall even when no one's watching. These seemingly simple behaviors, when done regularly with sincerity, impact the brain deeply, because every action becomes a biological anchor for a new belief. You're teaching your brain with every decision. When you choose to get up instead of curling into fatigue, your brain logs that as instruction. When you say no to what no longer serves, your brain registers boundary. When you choose to forgive, not out of weakness, but for freedom, your brain learns a new way to release energy. And the miracle is, the more you act in a new direction, the more your mind begins to shift along with you. No longer a battle between reason and emotion, but a unified flow from thought to action and back again. Tools are not lacking. What's lacking is consistency. You can use affirmations, visualization, meditation, embodiment, or rewriting inner narratives, but regardless of the tool, results only come when you practice long enough for the brain to adopt it as a new default. You don't need to be perfect every day. You just need to return, repeat, signal that you are serious, and your brain, like a loyal student, will begin redrawing its entire map according to the direction you set. Reprogramming the brain doesn't mean denying your old self. It's a journey toward deeper honesty. No longer living by reaction, but by intention. No longer letting the past dictate behavior, but allowing the future you long to live to become your guide. Real change doesn't come from fleeting inspiration, but from a series of small choices, repeated with clear, deep, and sustained will. And that's not a talent. That's discipline and awareness. You programmed the old patterns, even if unconsciously, so you can reprogram them if you have conscious will. Your brain is not against you. It simply operates based on what you've instructed it to do often enough. Teach it something new. No need to scream. No need to prove anything to anyone. Just choose again. Each morning, in every behavior, in every internal conversation, and gradually, you won't have to try to change anymore because you will have become that change from neural structure to behavioral identity. Reprogramming isn't just a technique. It is a declaration of sovereignty over your own life. No one is born with a strong mind. Just like muscle, inner strength is built through repetition, awareness, and consistent practice. You can't expect a calm, focused, and steady mind while allowing it to be immersed daily in chaos, procrastination, and unconscious reactions. The mind is the most flexible, yet also the most easily conditioned. If you don't train it, the world will train it for you. And rarely does this world want you clear-headed enough to swim against its current. Mental discipline isn't about suppressing or forcing yourself to think positively all day. It is the process of choosing intentional thought patterns, training your ability to focus, and staying committed to what's right even when your emotions don't cooperate. A person with mental discipline isn't someone who never gets distracted or shaken, but someone who knows how to return to center after every wave. They don't live in control, they live in sovereignty. And that sovereignty is forged day by day, moment by moment. Just like lifting weights doesn't build muscle the first time, observing your thoughts, changing your reactions, or staying present through discomfort won't cause instant transformation. But if you repeat it consistently and intentionally, you are forming new neural pathways where the mind learns not to react unconsciously, but to respond intelligently. Each time you pause before saying something hurtful, each time you resist letting anger dictate your behavior, each time you stay still amidst an urge, you strengthen that invisible muscle. Mental discipline is the ability to maintain selectivity in your thoughts. You can't stop thoughts from appearing, but you can choose which ones to keep. Like a gatekeeper at the entrance to a fortress, you have the right to reject thoughts that are harmful, even if they arrive disguised as logic. Not every negative thought is deep. Not every pessimistic analysis is wise. A disciplined mind is one that knows how to say no to what's useless, even if it wears the mask of reason. The greatest challenge of mental discipline isn't in extreme situations, it's in daily repetition. When you're tired, procrastinating, tempted to give up, or feel like telling yourself, just a little break, a small compromise each day is enough to undo what you've worked months to build. That's why the disciplined person isn't one who never falters, but one who knows exactly when to be firm with themselves. Not out of harshness, but because they respect the future they're building more than their temporary emotions. A disciplined mind doesn't react based on immediate emotion. It creates space between stimulus and response. That space, even if just a single breath, is where you reclaim choice. Not being swept away by discomfort, not letting impulse overtake purpose, not letting old wounds control new decisions. And this isn't talent, it's a skill. You can train it. Every time you choose presence over distraction, every time you remind yourself of your values rather than getting lost in doubt. Look at how you start your morning. The habit of checking social media, reacting quickly to information, eating mindlessly, all of it is training. But training for a mind that is easily influenced, off balance, and scattered. On the other hand, if you start with stillness, write a few lines of intention, read something thought-provoking, breathe deeply to reconnect, you are training your mind to know that you are its leader, not the other way around. And when that becomes the norm, You're not just changing that day, you're changing who you're becoming. Mental discipline doesn't eliminate emotion. It simply ensures emotion doesn't steer your life off course. A disciplined person is not cold-hearted. They are someone deep enough to understand. Emotion is a message, not a command. You can feel discouraged and still continue. You can feel anxious and still act. You can feel hurt and still choose kind words. The moment you behave differently from the mind's usual reflex is the moment you begin rewriting destiny. A crucial part of mental discipline is consistency. Not consistency with your moods, but with your values. You cannot rely on emotion to wait for the right moment. You must act based on what you know is right and repeat what's right, whether or not you feel like it that day. Just as a martial artist doesn't wait for motivation to train, a mind builder doesn't wait for the right mood to return to focus. They do it because it's the only path to becoming the strongest version of themselves. And perhaps the most important truth is this: mental discipline is not a journey with a final destination. It is a choice you make every day. When you choose not to get dragged into a pointless argument, when you choose calm in the face of bad news, when you turn down short-term gratification to uphold long-term principles. Each of those moments is a rep in training that invisible muscle. And no one may see it, but everyone will feel it in the way you show up, grounded, present, and undisturbed by the storm. Emotions don't show up to break you. They come to say something your logic hasn't yet noticed. When you feel sadness, anger, hurt, or anxiety, it isn't a sign of weakness. It's the whisper of a deeper mind trying to get your attention. But if you see emotions as disruptors, as things to eliminate, avoid, control, or reject, you will never hear the true message they're trying to deliver. And it is that very rejection, not the raw emotion itself, that drains you. Have you ever felt choked up without knowing why? Ever lashed out in anger and regretted it even though your rational mind told you to stay quiet? Ever smiled on the outside but felt like your heart just collapsed? That's when emotion shows up, not to make you lose control, but to point out that a part of you has been neglected, is in pain, and needs to be seen. Emotions are data. They carry information, and if you learn how to read them, instead of suppressing them, you'll uncover the true depths of your inner world. A mature person is not someone who no longer feels emotions, but someone who can recognize emotions without letting them blindly dictate their actions. The difference between someone ruled by reactivity and someone who lives with depth lies in the ability to pause in the flow of feeling and ask, what is this emotion trying to tell me? Anger might be a call to restore boundaries. Sadness might be a sign of unacknowledged loss. No emotion is meaningless if you have the courage to listen. The problem is that you grew up in a world conditioned to deny emotions. Don't cry. Be strong. Calm down. These words weren't meant to harm, but they unintentionally planted the belief that emotions are problems. And so you learn to stay silent when hurt, to hide when breaking down, to pretend to be okay while feeling chaotic inside. But repressed emotions don't disappear. They run underground, and when not released through conscious awareness, they explode through behavior. Vague anxiety, misplaced anger, paralysis when facing key decisions. What you need is not to control emotions, but to accompany them. Imagine emotions as children knocking on the door. One is anxious, one is angry, one is lonely. If you slam the door, they'll pound harder. If you yell at them, they'll scream back. But if you open the door, sit down and ask, what are you feeling? What do you need from me? You'll be surprised by how quickly the inner storm calms. Because emotions don't need fixing. They need to be seen and understood. And from that understanding comes the appropriate action. An essential part of inner mastery doesn't lie in always staying balanced, but in recognizing when you're off center. When anger flares, instead of instantly reacting, pause and ask, Which boundary of mine is being crossed? When sadness arrives, listen. What loss have I yet to acknowledge? When anxiety creeps in, observe what imagined future is distorting my present. That act of questioning becomes the gateway back to agency, not by resisting emotion, but by learning its language. You can't choose whether emotions appear, but you can choose your relationship with them. You can choose to be someone mature enough not to be swept away, and compassionate enough not to deny them. It's an art, strong like stone, soft like water. The person who masters their inner world is not cold. They simply don't let fear, anger, or pain steer their decisions. They feel fully, then choose their response. And because of that, every response comes from clarity, not chaos. The beautiful thing is this: emotions, when heard and handled correctly, release themselves. No need to force, no need to push away, just presence. When you are truly present with pain, without judgment, it begins to dissolve like a passing cloud. When you acknowledge fear without running, it steps back and lets you move forward. Emotions carry their own wisdom. And when you stop fighting them, you'll realize they were never the enemy. They were parts of you trying to find their way home. A steady mind is not one without emotion, but one that knows emotions are companions, not threats. And from there, you no longer live in fear every time a feeling rises, no longer hide your vulnerability, no longer run from yourself. You dare to sit with the storm inside like a seasoned sailor, knowing that the wave won't sink you unless you panic. It is in that stillness, within the storm, that you discover your true strength. Emotional intelligence is not the ability to hide emotions. It is the subtle skill of recognizing, interpreting, and navigating emotions, not only your own, but also those of others. A person with emotional intelligence doesn't live through avoidance or impulsive reaction. They live through a kind of inner wisdom, where emotions are observed like flowing water, neither suppressed nor swept away. They don't chase every wave of mood, but learn to steer the boat within the storm, one hand on the rudder, the other holding kindness. It's not hard to find intellectually smart people, but to meet someone who pauses before anger, stays calm under pressure, or listens to someone's sadness without shying away, that's rare. Because emotional intelligence doesn't come from degrees or experience, it comes from presence. From the ability to stay with emotion without judgment, from the sensitivity to sense what's unspoken, and the steadiness not to be shaken by another's emotional wave. Emotional intelligence begins with identifying the real emotion, not just labeling it. I'm sad, I'm angry, but going deeper, I feel abandoned. I feel unacknowledged. I carry the fear of being hurt. The ability to name emotion accurately is the first step to diffusing its trigger. Because once an emotion is named, it no longer hides like a ghost. It becomes a part of you that can be spoken with. That's why even a simple admission, I feel hurt, can release a seemingly senseless wave of anger. After identification comes interpretation. Where is this emotion coming from? Is it reflecting the present, or is it an echo from the past? A person with emotional intelligence doesn't just ask, what do I feel, but also, why do I feel this way? They can distinguish real emotion from conditioned reactions. They're not quick to blame because they know emotions aren't always facts, but they're always signals. And every signal, if patiently decoded, leads to a place of pain, an unmet need, or a boundary that needs to be reestablished. What sets people with emotional intelligence apart is not that they have no negative emotions, but that they know how to manage them like an artist. They don't let emotions overtake behavior, but they also don't use logic to deny them. They keep the inner space wide enough to feel sadness without collapsing, to feel anger without breaking, to feel anxiety without shutting down. And within that spaciousness, they choose how to respond rather than react. A delicate aspect of emotional intelligence is the ability to sense the emotions of others without absorbing them. Those lacking inner discipline tend to be either emotionally numb or overly fused with others' pain to the point of losing themselves. But someone with emotional intelligence is different. They practice empathetic boundaries. They see, they understand, they touch your pain, but they don't carry it, don't judge it, and don't become your emotional landfill. They act as mirrors, not to reflect fear, but to reflect truth. And in doing so, they bring comfort, not through words, but through full presence. Emotional intelligence is also the ability to navigate relationships in silence, in speech, and even in the unspoken. It helps you know when to step back instead of trying to win, when to listen instead of argue, when silence is wisdom and when silence is avoidance. A person with high emotional intelligence doesn't need to prove they're right. They choose to maintain connection. They don't react with ego. They respond with understanding, not because they're weak, but because they don't let ego lead the way. You can learn emotional intelligence. Yeah, you don't need to be a genius. You only need to practice daily with your own emotions. Start by sitting down when a feeling arises, and instead of pushing it away, ask, what does this want to teach me? Write it down. Listen. Don't rush to fix it. Let the emotion speak fully before you return to action. And if you do this long enough, you realize you're becoming freer. Not because emotions are gone, but because you've learned to move through them with kindness and steadiness. Someone with high emotional intelligence doesn't need to say much. The way they walk into a room already carries the energy of clarity, calm, and safety. They don't try to convince anyone they're smart, because their emotions have been processed deeply enough that they no longer need to shout their worth. They make others feel at ease, not because they always please, but because they don't let unhealed wounds dictate their interactions. And that's the kind of energy people trust, gravitate toward, want to hear, want to be near. You can build that kind of inner strength without needing to prove anything. You only need to begin training yourself in the skill of listening to emotions without getting entangled in them, to see without reacting, to understand without judging. That is intelligence, not displayed in certificates, but revealed in every conversation, in every unguarded look, in every moment you choose to uphold your dignity, in a world full of noise. It's not circumstances, not the past, and certainly not other people that are holding you back. What's quietly restraining your growth are limiting beliefs, statements you've repeated in your mind so often that you now believe them as truths. I'm not good enough. I'm not lovable. I can't change. These aren't facts. They are old stories, repeated long enough to become your self-definition. And the sad reality is, when you live by a distorted definition, your life gets distorted to match it. Limiting beliefs don't scream or make noise, but they control you with terrifying silence. They make you reject opportunities the moment a door opens. They make you doubt kindness, avoid love, or sabotage your own success because deep down, you don't believe you deserve it. They trap you in cycles you despise, and then you blame yourself thinking, maybe I'm just not strong enough. But the truth is, you're not weak. You're simply acting according to a belief someone or something planted in you long ago. Limiting beliefs aren't formed through logic, but through experience. A child once laughed at for speaking up may grow into an adult who believes, I shouldn't speak. A teenager who saw parents fight over money may conclude wealth leads to pain. Someone who's been betrayed may carry the belief, love is dangerous. These experiences embed themselves into the subconscious not through analysis, but through intense emotion. From there, they become inner truths, even when no one has ever verified them. The danger lies in the fact that you don't question these beliefs. They operate like background software in your mind. You don't realize you're living by them until your life begins to loop in baffling ways. You avoid what you actually want. You hold on to what you hate, and you think it's fate. But no, it's the subconscious core driving your choices, behaviors, and attitudes every day. A limiting belief is a cage, one you live inside without knowing you're imprisoned. You only begin to break that cage when you pause and ask, why do I believe this? Where did this belief come from? Is it still true for me today? And most importantly, who am I without this belief? These questions aren't easy to answer because limiting beliefs are often tied to fear. Fear of losing your foundation, fear of facing the truth, fear of entering the unknown. But you can't expand your life if you keep clinging to outdated mental pathways. No transformation happens without examining the ground you've been standing on. Take a simple example. If you believe, I don't deserve to be loved, you will unconsciously attract or remain in relationships that make you feel small, unsafe, or controlled. Not because you want to suffer, but because your subconscious is seeking confirmation of what it believes is true. It will twist life's data to match the internal script. This is known as cognitive filtering. You only notice what aligns with your belief and dismiss anything that contradicts it. The good news is beliefs, even deeply rooted ones, are not permanent. They are the product of repetition, which means they can be dismantled and rewritten through intentional repetition. But before you replace a belief, you must dare to doubt it. Dare to face what you call truth and ask, is this really my voice or someone else's psychological inheritance?
X.
You must accept that perhaps for a long time, you haven't been acting from your authentic self, but from unconscious programming. And from there, you gain the power to choose again, not from emotion, but from clarity. The journey of removing limiting belief doesn't require you to be perfect. It requires consistency. It demands enough courage to go against your old reflexes. If you believe you don't have a voice, then every time you stand up and speak, even with trembling, is a crack in the cage. If you believe you're not meant to lead, then every time you step up and take responsibility is a moment you rewrite yourself. And gradually, as these new behaviors are repeated, your brain begins to reshape the very belief system governing your entire life. You don't have to believe differently right away. You just need to be willing to place a question mark on what you once accepted as given. And every question mark is a blow to that invisible chain. When you realize you can live differently, feel differently, act differently, you've begun to separate yourself from the shadow of old stories. You weren't born to live in a cage. You were born to expand, to step beyond outdated patterns you'd never consciously agreed to. But to do that, you must dare to re-choose your beliefs, one root at a time. You can't change a belief just by thinking differently. Beliefs aren't formed through logical reasoning, but through repeated experiences deeply embedded in emotion. That's why, if you want to rewrite an old belief, you can't simply sit and imagine change. You must act as if what you now believe is true, and that very action, even if uncertain at first, becomes the first tangible proof for your nervous system that this new belief might be true. No one escapes old beliefs through thought alone. A person who believes, I'm not worthy, can repeat positive affirmations hundreds of times, but if they continue to endure toxic relationships, stay silent when disrespected, or hide their voice, the brain will silently conclude the old belief is still valid. On the other hand, if that person dares to speak up for the first time, to walk away from where they're not respected, to take one small action that expresses self-worth, then those behaviors become new data for the nervous system to relearn a new definition of self. That's why action, even small, has the power to shatter beliefs that once felt permanent. A limiting belief isn't dismantled by forcing positive thinking. It is dismantled by a new reality created through lived experience. If you believe you can't speak in public, start by speaking to a group of 3. If you believe you're not worthy of love, start by treating yourself as if you are someone deeply cherished. These actions are not pretend. They're tools to rewire belief through real felt experiences. Your nervous system doesn't learn through words. It learns through repeated experience. Every time you act against an old belief, you carve a new path in your brain. At first, this path is faint, fragile, doubt-laced. But with every step you continue, it becomes clearer stronger, and eventually solid enough to replace the old one. This is the essence of neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself, not through a single burst of willpower, but through deliberate, repeated action. You may not see the belief change in a day or even a week, but you'll see the difference in your gaze, in your posture, in how you walk into a room, in the decisions you make. You start behaving as if you already are a new version of yourself, even if, deep down, you're not entirely convinced yet. And that process of acting first, feeling later, is one of the most powerful tools to reprogram the subconscious, because the feeling will only follow once your brain has new evidence to process. Don't wait until you feel ready. That feeling may never come before you step outside your comfort zone. It only arrives after you've walked through doubt and survived it. Every time you do something that contradicts your old self, you're making a small break in the subconscious loop. And when enough of those breaks occur, the old default wiring begins to dissolve, making room for a new operating pattern. Rewriting a belief doesn't mean erasing the old completely. It's the process of overlaying a new layer on the old one until the new becomes strong enough, thick enough, and familiar enough to replace it. Just like changing a habit, you don't fight the old, you just keep choosing the new. And daily action is the lock-in for that commitment. You don't have to be bold, just consistent. A single conscious action, repeated regularly, holds more power than 1,000 affirmations, whispered into a life that still contradicts them. If you want to rewrite your deepest belief, don't begin with words, begin with a new choice in real life. Respond differently, hold your posture differently. Dare to say no. Dare to ask, dare to step up, dare to stand still. And each time you do, take note, let your body feel that this new thing is safe, possible, and believable. Only when experience becomes evidence does the subconscious begin to allow a new belief to take root. You are not a victim of the past, you are the author of the present, and from there, the architect of the future. But the only language your subconscious understands is behavior. Behavior is the strongest statement you send to your brain to affirm the person. Distance from the wave. And from that distance, you gain the power to choose your action instead of reacting by default. An emotionally mature person isn't someone who's always cheerful, but someone who can be present with their emotions without being consumed. They might feel anger but not lash out. They might feel anxious but not let it dictate behavior. They might feel sadness but not rush to numb it with consumption, avoidance, or blame. They stay centered inside even when the surface ripples. That is the strength of someone who knows emotion is data, not a direct. When a strong emotion arises, you don't need to defeat it. You only need to stay long enough to understand where it comes from. Anger, when held in silent observation, can reveal a sense of injustice. Jealousy, when seen without judgment, can point to a forgotten longing. Every emotion, when met with wholeness and sincerity, carries a message. And if you're patient enough to listen instead of react, you'll no longer be dragged by emotion. You'll walk with it as an ally. Mastering emotion is also mastering the nervous system, because emotion doesn't only live in the mind, it's stored in the body. A tight chest, a stiff neck, a discomfort in the stomach. If you ignore these biological signals, you miss the chance to stop unconscious reactions before they erupt into behavior. When you learn to feel your body, you can detect early signs. I'm getting triggered. And just a deep breath, a soft muscle release, a pause with your hand on your chest is enough to bring consciousness back, to disrupt the old chain reaction. True freedom doesn't mean being emotionless but not being ruled by emotion. You can't avoid hurt. You can't stop others from saying things that upset you, but you can choose not to let the past dictate how you live today. You can choose not to retaliate just because it was your 10-year-old reflex. You can choose not to run from opportunity because you once failed. Every time you remain present when emotion rises is a moment you free yourself from old chains. If you've ever wondered why change feels impossible despite understanding the theory, examine how you relate to emotion. It's not that you don't know what to do, it's that every time emotion surges, you fall into the old loop. Feel, react, regret, repeat. Only when you become present enough to notice the gap between emotion and action can you begin to design a new response. That gap, when widened enough, becomes the place where you reclaim your deepest freedom, the freedom to choose yourself beyond the shadow of the past. No one lives a life without ever being fractured. Every painful experience, every moment of rejection, every time you had to suppress your true emotions to be accepted, each created a small part of you that separated from your whole. It might have been a child who was too sensitive, laughed at, or forced to grow strong too early. These parts, though forgotten, still live quietly within you. And at some point they rise in a sudden reaction, in a seemingly irrational fear, or in a hollowness you can't explain. This fragmentation doesn't make you weak. It's simply the residue of how you learned to survive. But living in fragmentation is a subtle kind of loss. You might be competent, successful, well-mannered, even admired, and still feel as though something is off, like you're not truly living as your full self. Because when parts of you go unacknowledged, they operate silently in the dark. A person who is overly rational might be hiding an emotional part that never felt safe. A chronic people pleaser might be running from a bold part that was once silenced. The more you live away from these parts, the more you lose connection with yourself and gradually your sense of wholeness. Integration does not mean becoming perfect. It means no longer rejecting any part of yourself. It means daring to go within, sit down with every former version, every wound, every naive longing, and say, I see you. I won't abandon you anymore. That recognition is the first step toward transformation. When you stop running, the fragmented parts can return, and you begin to live as a unified being, not a collection of performances. What's crucial to understand is fragmentation isn't your fault. It's a survival mechanism. There were times you had to suppress emotion to be loved, moments you had to armor up to protect your dignity. Those parts that were put away saved you from harm. But now, as an adult, no longer needing the same defense, continuing to push them aside only extends the disconnection. Integrating the self means letting go of outdated strategies and replacing them with loving honesty toward yourself. The question is no longer, how do I get rid of fear, anger, weakness? But rather, can I hold space for these parts without being ruled by them? When you're strong enough to stay with your rawest feelings, without flinching, judging, or identifying with them, you become the leader of your inner system. And that is where wholeness begins. Integration also requires alignment between thought, emotion, and behavior. When you think one thing, feel another, and act in opposition, you fragment yourself. Every time you say yes while your heart says no, you cut away a piece of truth. Every time you pretend to be fine while chaos brews inside, you push authenticity into the shadows. Over time, you lose not only connection with others, but with yourself. Integration is about returning to your root, saying what is real, doing what aligns with your true values, even if it's not always comfortable. Strangely, when you live in wholeness, the world responds differently. People sense the unbroken energy within you. Relationships become clearer. Boundaries become easier to set. Decisions become more coherent. Because when you're no longer internally torn, you don't need to perform, you simply show up. And that authentic presence is the silent power that makes you magnetic, grounded, and unshakable. Integration doesn't mean you're always strong. Sometimes wholeness means daring to be vulnerable in the right places, crying where you need to cry, saying I'm not ready yet without shame. Because when you stop judging the imperfect parts of yourself, you no longer need to hide. And within that transparency, you become a safe space for yourself and for those who enter your life. Wholeness is not a destination, it's a way of living, a way you speak to yourself each day, a way you turn inward and ask, am I being honest? Am I living by what I truly believe? Is there a vital part of me I've been neglecting? These questions aren't for blaming. They're reminders that you have the right to live fully, truthfully, clearly, and that only when you live as a whole, unified being will you have the strength to walk firmly through a constantly changing world. Life doesn't always give you the power to choose what happens, but you always have the power to choose how you receive it, and that the response, not the circumstance, is what determines who you become. Most people live as if the world is the cause and they are merely the effect. They wait for others to change so they can feel at peace. They wait for favorable conditions to take action. They wait for external signals to feel worthy. But once you start living from the inside out, everything shifts. You're no longer led by reaction. You become the architect of your response. And that response doesn't arise from impulsive emotion, but from cultivated inner strength. Living from the inside out doesn't mean being indifferent to the world. On the contrary, it means being most awake to how the world impacts you and refusing to let it dictate the path you choose. People who live reactively are constantly governed by external factors. A negative comment can ruin their day. A cold glance makes them doubt themselves. One small mistake causes them to shrink with self-blame. They let the environment dictate their mood, others define their worth, and situations control their attitude. But those who live with intention are different. They don't let outside events rewrite their internal script. They step into the world with a clear operating system, knowing who they are, what they're doing, and why. Orientation isn't just a list of goals. It's an internal sense of value, of personal standards, of long-term vision. A person with direction doesn't react impulsively to criticism. They pause, listen, filter, and keep what aligns, not out of fear of being hurt, but because they have an inner compass to guide them. When you have a strong enough principle, you don't need to brace yourself in the storm. You simply stand at your center and everything revolves around you instead of pulling you away. The clearest difference between reacting and creating is this: reaction stems from lack of control, creation from intention. Reaction chases, creation leads. Reaction is driven by the past, by familiar patterns. Creation follows a new design, one you consciously choose and commit to bringing to life each day. Creating your life is not a race for achievements. It's the process of refining every small response to align with the person you want to become. It's waking up each morning and asking, what energy do I want to bring to the world today? It's standing before a difficult moment and choosing to respond from wisdom, not instinct. It's knowing exactly what seeds you are planting through your thoughts, words, and actions, because you understand that outcomes are simply reflections of what you've sown internally. Don't confuse living authentically with reacting carelessly. Some people claim they're being true to themselves when they yell, criticize, or blame, but that's not honesty. That's lack of awareness. Living authentically isn't dumping your unprocessed emotions onto others. It's having the courage to face your feelings truthfully, process them in stillness, and choose an expression that's responsible. That's maturity. That's when you're no longer controlled by emotion, but begin to lead yourself from within. When you live from the inside out, you no longer wait for the world to tell you you're enough before you feel confident. Confidence comes from knowing you're living in alignment with what you believe in. When you act from what you truly value, a deep inner calm arises. No external validation needed. You don't have to shout. You don't have to prove. Your silent clarity will naturally generate a gravity that draws attention. This is why people who live with inner direction emit a very different kind of energy. They don't need to be loud, but are always present at the right moment. They don't react to win. They listen to understand what's truly at play. They're not driven by the need to be accepted, but guided by an internal commitment. And paradoxically, because they don't chase acceptance, they often receive genuine respect. And living from the inside out also doesn't mean being rigid. On the contrary, it's a flexibility rooted in direction. You can adjust your plans without losing your values. You can change your expression while maintaining your integrity. You can withdraw without compromising yourself. True steadiness doesn't come from clinging to everything. It comes from knowing where you're headed. So every adjustment is intentional. And ultimately, living as a creator is not some lofty ideal. It's a practical decision to pause, turn inward, and start asking the right questions. What am I living by? Are my reactions building or destroying? Am I acting as if I've already become the highest version of myself? Each of these questions is a step forward from reflex to choice, from default to design, from rushing through life to living with purpose. There is no permanent milestone that marks you've become a master of yourself. No certificate declares you forever awakened. Mastery is not the final result of an inner journey. It is a choice, repeated every single day, and sometimes every hour, because in each moment you stand at a crossroads. On one side is the path of old patterns, reflexes, avoidance, procrastination, blame. On the other side is the road fewer people take, facing the truth with awareness, taking responsibility for your emotions, and responding from wisdom rather than instinct. And that's where the mastery mindset is forged. You don't have to be perfect to live with mastery. On the contrary, it's on the days when you feel most fragile, most irritable, most disappointed that you have the greatest opportunity to train your inner strength. Because mastery isn't the absence of emotion. It's the ability to stay present with emotion without being ruled by it. It's the capacity to recognize when you've veered off course and choose to return. It's having the courage to say, I reacted like I used to, but I won't let that define me. Each time you return to clarity, you're strengthening your spiritual muscle, the one that keeps you grounded when life shakes. The mastery mindset doesn't promise you'll always be calm, always be right, or always feel motivated. It guarantees only one thing. You'll no longer be the helpless victim of yourself because you start to have tools. You begin to recognize when old patterns arise. You have the capacity to observe instead of react. And most importantly, you begin to act, not from a place of wanting to control the world, but from the only place you truly can, managing your inner operating system. Every day is a quiet, steady test. Will you let old habits lead, or will you pause, ask a better question, and choose a new response? Will you continue to judge yourself for your mistakes, or learn to see each misstep as a chance to refine? Will you live as someone seeking validation, or as someone who defines themselves? These choices are so small, they're almost invisible, and it is precisely this invisibility that makes them the true foundation of personal power. The mastery mindset is a nonlinear process. Some days you feel like you've left the past far behind. Then in a single moment, an old reaction resurfaces, and you feel disappointed in yourself. Don't let that fool you. A setback isn't failure. It's just a reminder that mastery is a skill that must be maintained, like a body that needs movement. No one stays awake without intentionally nurturing awareness, just like an athlete, no matter how skilled, still trains daily to stay in shape. Self-mastery doesn't mean becoming rigid, purely logical, or controlling everything with iron discipline. In fact, those with a true mastery mindset are soft within. They don't strain to manage every emotion, but accept the shifts within as a natural part of being. They don't force themselves to always be positive, but allow themselves to feel every state without letting those states dictate behavior. The beautiful truth is, you don't need anyone's permission to begin living with a mastery mindset. You don't have to wait for a big moment or a better mood. Each moment is an invitation. That invitation arrives when you're about to procrastinate, but choose to stand up. When you're about to react, but choose to pause and breathe. When you feel unworthy, but keep walking anyway. No one sees all the things you do in silence, but each of those actions is quietly rebuilding your foundation with discipline, honesty, and persistence. The world doesn't need more people shouting slogans about inner power. It needs those who live it. even on their most exhausted days. And what makes someone truly different isn't talent, circumstance, or luck, but the choices they repeat each day. The choice to observe themselves, adjust their attitude, uphold their values even when no one is watching. That is the model of a master. A person who doesn't live by what is easy, but by what is right. Not pushed by circumstances, but led by an inner vision. Ultimately, the mastery mindset isn't about changing once and for all. It is the act of returning to the center within you, where you are reminded that everything outside is just context. The one who decides the outcome is still you, and each day you get to choose again. You can fall and learn again. You can be tired and still move forward, but you never go back to the old version because you've seen the light within, and you know, as long as you can still choose, you are still free.